Morning, everybody, and welcome. We are in the book of 2 Kings. If I seem a little cloudy today, there's just like pollen or something. I don't know what it is. Something's attacking me. So I got a fat head. I don't know what it is. It's just everything's inflamed in there. But we are studying from the book of 2 Kings, and it's been kind of it's been a historical perspective for Israel, as well as looking at how God is dealing with people during this time, specifically kings, because they play an important role in the direction of how they're going to go. And when we learn of what God expects from the kings, it's not a far reach for us to say that, well, God pretty much expects that from us too. I think we've also seen that the people are kind of going crazy as well, and they kind of just follow along. Sometimes they do better, sometimes not. So this is just like normal life, as it's always been, and it just happens to focus on the rulers at that time. So are there any observations or anything anybody wants to bring up so far that maybe we missed? Okay, before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Holy Father, we are so thankful, Lord, that you have blessed us with your word, and we are so thankful for your Son and for the sacrifice that he performed for us that reveals to us your love and your mercy and your grace. We hope and pray, Lord, that everything we do today and throughout our lives will be pleasing to you. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, just to back up a little bit, we know that right now we're in the narrative of Hezekiah, and Israel has been taken away by Assyria. They're the great kingdom, empire at this point. And as I've said so many times already, I know what's happening politically with Assyria isn't really revealed a whole lot. But they are at war with Babylon. Sennacherib of Assyria really wanted to kind of bring Assyria back to its former glory. And they fight with Babylon. They do all these different things, and the Medes and the Persians. And we see that when they take away Israel, they actually take some of them into the cities of the Medes. So all of these things are going on. And when Hezekiah becomes king, he inherits this servitude to Assyria. Ahaz became a servant to them when he was being assaulted by Syria and by Israel itself. So that's what he inherited, and he decides he's going to rebel and not pay that tribute. One of the other things we noted, and this is all these little different things going on, one of the other things we noted was when you look in Isaiah, you see when Hezekiah is king, that God condemns the action of trying to make an alliance with Egypt. And I was talking with Tom last week about that, and I agree with his analysis on that, that it may not have been Hezekiah himself necessarily who tried to do that. It might have been one or several of his entourage that went over there and thought it was a good idea. Because when you read in Isaiah the scolding by God, he doesn't name Hezekiah. You see, Hezekiah is it's very ambiguous. God is just not happy about it. And so, however that went down, if it was Hezekiah, he absolutely repents of that. So those are all these little things that are happening during this time. So one of the things that we saw last week, we didn't get into it a lot, but we will get into it in chapter 20, is his prayer to God. When Rabshakeh comes, he's this messenger from Sennacherib, and he basically tells the people, why would you rely on Hezekiah? Why would you rely on this Jehovah God? This Jehovah God, hasn't been able to do anything for you. Look at what Hezekiah has done. He's removed all the other gods, and he's, who you should be relying on, and who's been able to conquer us? Nobody has. And they basically terrorize the people because Hezekiah's servants say, don't speak in our language. And they go, oh, okay. And they speak in their language because they know they're terrifying these people, because they're basically saying, you can have lots of good things if you just surrender to us. And, and basically the flip side of that is if you don't, you're dead. So that was the threat. And they actually, and this is the fascinating part, Sennacherib actually sent these words in letters to be, communicated to Israel, to the king specifically. And in verse 14, Hezekiah prays a prayer. And Wednesday, this is kind of, on Wednesday, there was a lot of discussion about prayer, and I wanted to kind of springboard off of that because this is really important. Hezekiah took the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it, and he went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And that's in chapter 19, verse 14. So he takes this letter, and you can see him making his case before God. And he says, hey, these guys are disrespecting you. And so we read last week that God hears his prayer in verses 35 through 37. Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the men rose early in the morning, behold, all of them were dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. It came about as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that a couple of guys, I don't want to say their names because this is just too long, killed him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Ararat. So his son becomes king. So God vindicates Hezekiah by killing 185,000 soldiers, and including captains and generals and that sort of thing. So last week we noted that when God is talking about why he's going to do this before he does it, he's basically telling Sennacherib, you think you did this stuff. You think you have this power because of you, or maybe because of some other god. And then he tells them, I did it. You're here because I put you there. And he tells Hezekiah, don't worry, he's not going to even shoot an arrow here, and he doesn't. So that's where we left off, and to go a long way around here. And just a couple of things about that. Historically, there's this God that he's worshiping can't be found in the secular writings. It may be that some of the things I read, this Nisroch God, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that he was worshiping his God, and while he was worshiping that God didn't save him. His own relatives killed him. I think some versions say his sons, but it could mean other things. So one of the points that Barry put in the book is from Halley's Handbook, and this is just a point of secular reference, and I'm paraphrasing. It says, Sennacherib did create an account of this history on a clay prism which can be viewed in the Oriental Institute Museum in Chicago, and that name has been changed. He writes of his victories against Hezekiah, including the capture of over 200,000 people. He does not make any claim of overtaking Jerusalem, and in traditional fashion, he would have left that out and if he was defeated in any way. And his point is that it's a remarkable historical fact that can't be disputed. Okay, anybody have any observations or anything on any of this as we get into chapter 20? Okay, so this is going to be Hezekiah dies in this chapter, and he becomes ill, and we're going to see a few things about him that are good and some things are not so good. And again, I just wanted to kind of focus on the fact that he's going to pray again. And it's really important, in my mind, to see the importance of prayer from this. And that, in this instance, he's praying because he's in desperate times. But I think as Christians we know, and this is what the discussion was on Wednesday, we know, and this is something that Aaron I think tried to bring up, is that should we just pray when we're desperate? and I just wanted to get into that. But let's get into what happens here. Verses 1 through 11. In those days, Hezekiah became mortally ill, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came to him and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." Then he turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, "Remember now, O Lord, I beseech you, how I have walked before you in truth and with a whole heart, and you have done what is good in your sight. And have done what is good in your sight." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Before Isaiah had gone out of the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Return and say to Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of your father David, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. And I will defend this city for my own sake and for my servant David's sake." Then Isaiah said, "Take a cake of figs." And they took it and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. Now Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord the third day?" Isaiah said, "This shall be the sign." And I just realized the 3 days thing in there in the association with Christ. Sorry, it just hit me. From the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps or go back 10 steps? So Hezekiah answered, "It is easy for the shadow to decline 10 steps. No, let the shadow turn backward 10 steps." Isaiah the prophet cried to the Lord, and he brought the shadow on the stairway back 10 steps, by which it had gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. And depending on your version, that might be a sundial. And there was no determination on that, was it steps or was it a sundial, because the word just means something that's lifted up, and it could be either one. The important part is we have a miracle here where the shadow's going in reverse. Okay. Really quick, 2 Chronicles 32, verses 24 through 36. In those days Hezekiah became mortally ill, and he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord spoke to him and gave him a sign. But Hezekiah gave no return for the benefit he received, because his heart was proud, Therefore wrath came on him and on Judah and Jerusalem. However, Hezekiah humbled the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord did not come on them in the days of Hezekiah. Now Hezekiah had immense riches and honor, and he made for himself treasuries for silver, gold, precious stones, spices, shields, and all kinds of very valuable articles. Storehouses also for the produce of grain, wine, and oil, pens for all kinds of cattle and sheep, folds for the flocks. He made cities for himself and acquired flocks and herds in abundance, for God had given him very great wealth. It was Hezekiah who stopped the upper outlet of the waters of Gihon and directed them to the west side of the city of David, which was a just giant tunnel he built to avoid not having water when the siege came. He knew this was going to happen. This was a really great engineering feat. Hezekiah prospered in all that he did, even in the matter of the envoys of the rulers of Babylon, who sent to him to inquire of the wonder that had happened in that land. God left him alone only to test him, that he might know all that was in his heart. Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and his deeds of devotion, behold, they are written in the vision of Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amos, in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. So Hezekiah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the upper section of the tombs of the sons of David, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem honored him at his death, and his son Manasseh became king in his place. Okay, so he's a great king. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And when we first read about him, no king was better than him before or after, according to this. And we're going to have to answer that when we get to Josiah, but we'll get to that point when we do. So there are a lot of things going on. The question that Barry has in here is, did God answer Hezekiah's prayer by changing his mind about his death? Or was it God's plan in the beginning to allow Hezekiah to live? That's the question that he has. And I'm assuming what he means is what God meant by, God just wanted to scare him, I guess. And, telling somebody you're going to die is an absolute truth, no matter what age you are. And Hezekiah just assumed that he was going to die like right now. I don't know. But that's the question. Did God change his mind? Steve?
Since we brought up a sermon preached by somebody here, I want to bring up another one. Get Tom to give you a copy of the one he preached about pride about 5 months ago. It's one of the best I can recall. Between that and the writings of C.S. Lewis, it's whether you're talking about Hezekiah or going up steps, that I just wanted to vouch for those two as worthy reads. I mean, I'm serious about Tom's. I have a child that a grandchild, and she has all the track trophies you can think of. She's just amazing, and I have to keep the pride down.
Okay. Pride is an issue. I think, it's really easy to see when we see a story about a king. And the last thing I want to do is apply it to my life. I'm not proud. What are you talking about? Do I have pride? And I'll just say this. A couple of days ago, I had to do some stuff on the DMV site. And I was sitting there and I realized that, they now take appointments. And it's a really great system now. You can do appointments and you go in. and it's much faster than you used to have to go in there and just sit around for half a day. I remember sitting around for 3 or 4 hours until finally they get to your name, and you're number 32 and you're number 98 or whatever. And oh no, and you're just it's so infuriating to do that. I have to wait. And I was sitting there trying to do the stuff online. And it's so much more convenient. And I was like an hour into this thing I was trying to do, and I wasn't getting anywhere because it was confusing, and maybe I'm just dumb. I don't know, but it was like I started something. Oh, I can't do that until I have to, and I was just getting so frustrated. And Robin came in and she goes, "What is going on?" And I was just, "Wow, this is just it's terrible. I have to sit. I mean, this is taking too long. Why can't it be easy? Why can't it just be easy?" And she said, "Are you grateful that you even have a truck?" It's like, Kong, she just hit me over the head with the reality of what my attitude really was. And I'm not doing this to confess a great sin or anything like that. But that's how easy it is for that kind of pride to slip in to you. I should have something better. I should have something easier. Me. I just read last week how God says it's not you. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's just kind of what that reminded me of that kind of triggered that thought. Aaron, then Dave.
I don't know if I see the mind of God changing in this story as much as I see the heart of Hezekiah changing.
Exactly.
And I think that's
yeah, and I think that should be part of our prayer discussion, right? When we're discussing prayer, there are a lot of things that tell me that God didn't change it. God wasn't trying to trick him into becoming humble. Dave?
Well, it's like that story from the beginning of time. Look what I have done for you, Lord. How come you're killing me? I on my own merit, I deserve to live. And that's completely off base. God can kill us, he can cause us to live. Right. I don't think he changed his mind because he didn't say when he would kill him.
No, he didn't.
So I just see that Hezekiah has a little problem like we all have when it comes to how we live our life to him. Sometimes, and I don't think there's anybody exempt in this room that hasn't done that at one time or another. So it's something to be fearful of because what it says to me is God is the one who's in control, not you. I mean, you can take all the vitamins you want and all that stuff, but that isn't what's going on here. He's telling me, get your house in order. That's a scary thing. Now that, you mentioned, did he do it to scare him? That would scare me. That makes it more immediate in your own mind. But the point is that he's in control, and it's not because of our own merit. I mean, that's a wisp of smoke.
Right.
Tom, can you turn this thing down just a little bit? It's really loud. Thank you.
What was he physically doing, though, when he did that, when he said that prayer? He was weeping. He turns to the wall and starts to weep. So we see this physical manifestation of his mindset, and I think that's what, Aaron, I think that's what you were driving at. He humbles himself in this physical fashion toward God. And, I don't think God was trying to trick him. I think he was going to die. And because there are a couple of things he says, you shall die, which could have been later. But then he says he added these years. Sean.
Sorry, I'm a little hoarse still. But I do think that one thing we know is that God does not change. I don't know about changing his mind, but his character does not change. And in the New Testament, we read that God is not the author of confusion. And though that was specifically meant for worship, I believe it extends to other facets of life, because our worship extends to other facets of life.
Yes.
And whenever I think we see something that God has said or done and we find it confusing, we're like, God, it's confusing. I'm like, no, we're just too dumb to understand it. We're just not there yet. So whenever there's that, I think it just takes time. It just takes more looking into it, and eventually the answer comes to us. And sometimes it might be a decade or a few decades, and then
Yeah.
finally, oh, there it is. But
Yeah.
it's due to our own flaws, not God's, that something is confusing.
Yeah, he allows us to be tested. He allows us to be tested, but I don't see God going around trying to trick people, okay? I don't see that happening. Now, in the case of, I don't remember which king it was, God allowed a spirit to come lie to one of the kings. I do remember that. But God himself isn't going to try and trick you into doing something. He doesn't need to do that. Why would he need to do that? He's straightforward with everything. Okay?
Well, what I find interesting is that if his life had not been extended, Manasseh would not have been born. So
Oh, is that what that means?
that
Okay.
led to all
Because
kinds
that
of...
question comes up. That question's going to come up here.
Oh, okay.
But that's a good point. I did not even look at that. That's a good point. That's a good point. And that's very interesting. I would also add to that, when we start looking at Manasseh, because we'll get to that, God has already passed judgment on Judah because of Ahaz. That's not going away. And that's already in place because he sacrificed children, his own children. And because of that, the judgment was not going to go away. So when we get to Manasseh, and that's a great point. I didn't see that. So I think I just don't see God not, he's trying to trick them. He said he's going to add the years. You can't add something to something that's already there. If he would have said you're going to live 15 more years, that would have been different. But he added years. So you add something to something that has a terminated end. It also says that God was not happy with him because he was proud, because he did not return according to the benefit. What was the benefit? Well, the benefit was 15 more years. More years. So having more years means more than something, and that implies an end. Steve and then Betty.
Imagine some things. Was that would be the first one, right? Was First King. No, back in the day when he was hiding in the material in Benjamin's tribe, and his name was Saul. Okay. Isn't that why he went to see the witch at Endor or something? Because he was having...
Oh, well, that could be. I don't know. Yeah, he did do that whole conjuring up Samuel thing. And Samuel's like, what are you doing? That was weird. But yeah, Saul is another example of the pride issue that we can all wrestle with at one point or another in our lives. Betty?
Well, to me, this just proves that God hears our prayers. I believe that God did respond to Hezekiah's prayer. Hezekiah was praying.
Yeah.
God heard him right away and
Yeah.
answered him. And to me, you
He
can
said
go around
that.
the bush several times here, but to me, that's the proof.
He says it. He says,
Yes.
I heard you and I saw your tears. So he's very much affected. So what does that tell us about, not only about our prayers, does that encourage us at all? I mean, should we be encouraged from this at all? I mean, do we find encouragement from this? And as a Christian, how do we practice that prayer life? Because that can be difficult sometimes. It can be difficult to remember. What does it mean? Answer this, if you could. What does it mean to pray without ceasing? Does that mean I need to have my head bowed down 100% of the day while I'm driving, while I'm doing, whatever? What does that mean? Because I think if you can describe praying without ceasing, I think that will answer a lot of what I'm asking here. Aaron.
Praying without ceasing is a mindset that we always need God, and we can't do it alone. When Hezekiah got into a situation of pride, said his heart was lifted up, he was thinking too highly of himself, and he needed to be reminded of his, his position.
His place before God,
His
right?
place before God,
Right.
which is, even as king, is far below where God is. And so God's desire for Hezekiah was that he would respond the way he did, that he would humble himself so that he could answer his prayer. We praying without ceasing would be for us to not get into a position where we need to be faced with death before we turn to God. That would be ideal. To not let ourselves get to a place where we need to be faced with a life or death situation before we turn to God again.
Okay. Anything else? I mean, how is I don't know what the question is. How do we reflect a good prayer life? What does a good prayer life look like? Is my question. I mean, we have two examples of two very passionate prayers here. I want to qualify it with this. This guy, this man, he's just a man. He's put in this position by God, and he's about to lose a lot. And what I mean by that is, he's ruling over a nation. So he's gonna, it depends on how you look at things. He's gonna lose face. He's gonna lose property. He might even lose his life. No telling what. The Assyrians were some of the most brutal fighters ever, even before, relative to what was already going on, which was, beheading and all kinds of things. They were even worse. So who knows what, if you're in Hezekiah's shoes, you're thinking all kinds of things could happen. My sons could be murdered. Who knows what's going to happen next? So he's faced with all of these existential threats. Do we have existential threats? And if we don't, can we still have a good prayer life? I guess is the question. Do we wait until somebody's threatening us? Okay. Steve, I think you have something.
Well, I think David is our best example of having a good prayer life.
Okay.
He never stopped praying, and he wrote down. You read Psalms, you read his prayer life. To me, that's the best example we could have.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts when I was reviewing this. Lisa, and then Steve.
Well, Hezekiah changed things when he became king. He did pull down the places that
Yeah.
they weren't supposed to worship. He did return worship to God.
Yeah.
So he did, he did have faith from his heart towards God. And much like David, when faced with these issues of existential threat, he went to Isaiah and through Isaiah to
Okay.
God.
And that goes back to what Aaron was talking about, keeping God centric in your life. That's praying without ceasing, right? That's keeping him centered in your life. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in that meditative state necessarily. It just means you rely on God, and you have this lens. You know, we have this lens, and not you, we all have this lens as Christians of everything that happens good in our lives is a product of God's graciousness towards us, right? I mean, and so instead of becoming impatient or angry or whatever, just remember I think it was Greg that said, you know, his mom or whoever would say, remember who you are. And that carries a lot of weight, you know, to have that thought. You know, remember who we are. We are representatives of God. We are his children. And anyway, I just think all of these things are really important. And on top of that, and this is something that Aaron, you said on Wednesday, that got me thinking about, you know, we go to God to ask him, but and your example of David shows the flip side of that. Because when you go to church, you know, you come to church to be here. We don't just come here to get stuff. We're not here to get stuff. We're here to give God something. We give him glory, to give him the honor that he deserves. And that is having a God-centric life. And we talk about that a lot. We come here to worship God. That's why we're here. And we are reminded, and I say this a lot, we are reminded when we perform the Lord's Supper who we are. Every week we remember, oh yeah, Jesus was hanging on the cross because of God's grace for me. And, you know, I use this analogy a lot. If somebody stopped me from walking in front of a bus, I would be so grateful. And the next morning when I wake up, I would remember the sound of that bus and almost being killed, but I was saved. And it should be much that same way of our own salvation. And it is, I'm sure, for everybody, that, you know, we remember that salvation, and being here helps refresh that. Okay. Anything else anybody wants to add? Steve, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just talking about not ceasing to pray and all that. David had an intimate relationship with God. And for us, the way we have an intimate relationship is being in his word. And when we see his word, it's just a constant invitation all the time to demand that we change our lives, do things differently. So that's a way that, you know, if you're in the word, it's going to demand that you reflect on what God is saying to you, and hopefully as a result you're in prayer about that.
Amen. And sometimes it just means leaving this close by somewhere. If you put it away, you might not use it as much. But if you have it out and you have a plan of how you're going to go through it, you don't even have to study. You can just read it, and it'll help in that pursuit of getting closer to God. Sean and Steve. I'm sorry, Betty.
Well, I always go back to Jesus' teachings. Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, and he says, give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation. To me, when he said daily, to me, I don't feel right if I don't pray to God every day. I don't feel safe going through the day without praying to him. So I think that is a good guide for us all, to at least daily engage in prayer with the Lord. It strengthens us, it helps us, it guides us. That's what I think.
Were you raised like that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Of course, I had a very faithful mother, who taught us that.
That's a great honor
Yeah.
for your parents for
Yeah.
that. For some of us who maybe weren't raised that way, it becomes more of a discipline where we're having to discipline ourselves. So you got to remember where you came from. Remember who you are. Sean?
Sometimes I find it somewhat overwhelming to try to comprehend the debt that I owe God for saving me. But I do not find it as overwhelming to consider the communication. Like, if I said my communication has not ceased, like with my parents or with a friend, I can say, okay, I haven't stopped talking to them, even though I'm not talking to them every second. If I'm talking to them continually without a sudden break or an absence, I'm doing all right. The best way that I can think of what is healthy communication with God is, what is healthy communication with your employer, your boss, or a junior employee to you? Someone, like, you don't just report when the building's burning down. You report the good things, the bad things, the progress, the things you're struggling with and need help with. So if you can say, okay, if God was my employee or my employer, what would I be communicating? How often would I be talking? I want status updates. I want, hey, how are things going? When's the next time I'm going to check in? Like, these things can be planned out. But I think it's much easier for me to comprehend it on that level rather than try to say, how do I talk to someone who has literally saved me from death and hell with their own son's sacrifice? That's just totally different from, I'm just going to communicate to this person on a regular basis in an honest way that communicates what I'm doing, what I need, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, that's an excellent, wow, what a great approach. You're looking at it as like as you're managing your life, and you're speaking to God about all these things, whether it's something you need or something you're looking to do, that kind of thing. Is that what you're saying? Okay, it's a relationship, isn't it? And it's fostered, God's there waiting for us to foster that. Steve?
We're given names of people who have done this well. I wanted to add the name of Daniel, and I can't just put it into simple sentences, but there's much evidence that he was not worried as to what he would pray when he needed to pray. He knew things. He prophesied about many things, and that's someone I can't say this example or this example or this example, but we all kind of have this part where it says the Spirit interprets the what you bring, and boy, you're not going to know the right thing to say, but he knows that in your heart and your spirit.
He had a really good prayer life, obviously, and he was so devoted to it that when the edict came down that if you're going to pray, you're going to die, he didn't care because he fostered, I think, probably the exact kind of thing that everybody's talking about in one form or another. Lord, I'm managing my life. Here's what's coming up. Here's the issues that I'm seeing. Here's the issues I have with myself, along with the beginning of that maybe being realizing who God. You have to realize who God is when you approach Him. Aaron.
Just wanted to ask a question that maybe we can talk about next week because we're out of time. But is it okay to ask for a sign? What do we think about that? Is that a lack of faith? There's multiple occasions of people that asked for signs and God gave them. Is that a part of? Do we pull that into today? And if so, how does that look? And what does that? How does that work? So
Well, Hezekiah does, doesn't he?
something for us to think about and maybe start with next week.
How do I know this is going to happen? And I think there's probably as many answers as there are people on that one. But Steve, did you have something?
Well, it's just a subject definitely for a long time, but time. If I'm trying to analyze things in a comparative way, there's always a variable of time. How it doesn't always, probably doesn't chronology everything like a public accountant or something would do, but he accomplishes, and you find. And if you wait on the Lord, some period of time, it's not the same. You realize that he answered you, and you got exactly what he expected, as told by Mark in chapter we read over the summer.
Okay, there's a lot in there. We're gonna have to, and there's a lot to answer about that, especially about his answers, I think. Anyway, we're just about out of time. We're going to finish this chapter pretty quickly next week. We're going to see Babylon start taking the stage on this. And we're going to get back to this prayer part. We're going to finish that as well, because I think we need to look at some of these things. I trust that everybody here has a prayer life in one form or another. But pride and having a good prayer life, all those things can be issues for any of us. So we'll get into that. And then chapter 21 covers a lot of years very quickly, and we're actually pretty close to the end of Judah itself. Thank you.